Before you see season 4 of The Chosen, you're gonna wanna know this. For 3 seasons, we've been following the love story of Thomas and Ramah. In fact, last season, we saw Thomas ask Jesus for help in proposing to Ramah. But before that can happen, a lot of things have to happen. And there's actually a really good biblical reason to believe that this love story might be doomed. Wanna know why? Then join me for this episode of The Chosen Explained. But first, if you love learning insights about the Bible and want to see connections between shows like The Chosen and the Bible that will transform the way you read Scripture, then click the link above and down in the description where you can download my free resource called 7 Biblical Secrets Hidden in The Chosen. This will show you connections to Scripture and the first century world of Jesus that are present in the show, but most people don't notice. We've packed a whole lot of information into a really small package, just like this video. Speaking of, let's dive in. For 3 seasons, we've been watching the love between Thomas and Ramah grow. And last season, we got a sense that we might actually get to see the two of them get married very soon. But before that can happen, there are a lot of things that have to fall into place. And the first of them is this man. If Thomas hopes to marry Ramah, he must first get the blessing of her father, Kaphni, which is what he and any other young man hoping to get married in the first century would have had to do. You see, in Jewish culture, betrothal was a much more serious and specified process than your typical engagement today. If Thomas and Ramah want to get married, he can't just get down on one knee and propose. The first step in a betrothal process would be for the families to get involved. Thomas's father and Ramah's father would have to meet. And not only would they discuss whether the marriage of these two young people was a good idea, they'd also discuss if the joining of these two families was wise. And that's because Jewish society was a collectivist society. What mattered most was the community, the needs of the people collectively. It wasn't just 2 individuals getting married, it was 2 families. They would be connected for life, and they would be intimately involved in one another's lives. Now, in the show, Thomas's father isn't alive, and so in season 3, he asks Jesus to stand in for him. But either way, if the 2 fathers decided that it was a good fit for these 2 individuals and these 2 families to unite, then the formal engagement would begin. But instead of Thomas and Ramah picking out place settings or hiring their DJ, as soon as they got engaged, they were considered for all intents and purposes to be husband and wife. They were in a binding relationship. A legal contract called a ketubah was signed. Dowries were exchanged. The only things keeping them from being fully married were the wedding ceremony and the consummation of the marriage. But for the most part, from this point on, the 2 of them would officially be bonded together. And because of how they did this, not only were they entering into this union together, they were doing so with the support and the guidance of the entire community who surrounded them. As they started their family, as they tried to establish their home, as they raised their children, the community would walk with them on this journey. But this wasn't the only thing they'd need to do if they wanted to get married, because in addition to being a community decision, marriage was also a legal matter. As I said a moment ago, before a couple could get married, dowries had to be exchanged. And this is because in many ways, marriage was a transaction. One family was losing a daughter, and another family was gaining one. This is why the man's family would pay a dowry for the woman. They were compensating the other family for their loss of their daughter, this important part of their family who would no longer be able to help support the household. In fact, there were actually 2 forms of dowries that were provided to the woman and her family. The first was called a mohar. This traditionally would have been paid by Thomas's father to Ramah's father. As I said, Ramah's family was losing a daughter and Thomas's family was gaining her. So the mohar was meant to compensate them for their loss. But this money didn't solely go to Ramah's family. A significant portion was set aside for Ramah in case Thomas died or divorced her. You see, often, if a woman found herself in one of these situations, it could be very hard for her to remarry. If her family didn't take her back, or if she didn't quickly marry, she could find herself destitute. So the mohar helped to prevent against that. And so did the second type of dowry, the matan. This is the dowry they're talking about throughout this episode. It would have been given to Ramah by Thomas personally. And once again, in many ways, it was for her protection. If Thomas died or divorced her and she had no one to provide for her, the mohar and the matan ensured that she would have something. Now, of course, this doesn't sound very romantic, but it's an important insight into the workings of society in the first century. Marriage was a serious covenant. Many lives were impacted by this union. And while it was certainly a source of celebration, it wasn't taken lightly. That said, when a Jewish couple did get married, the celebration itself was huge. In fact, we can hardly comprehend just how big Jewish wedding festivities were back then. Whereas we tend to celebrate the wedding day, Jewish families celebrated the wedding week. Jewish people saw weddings as an opportunity for celebration, a reminder of the union between God and Israel. The chuppah, or the wedding arch, was an illustration of how the Hebrew people stood beneath Mount Sinai as they entered into a covenant relationship with God. The ketubah, which we mentioned earlier, was a reflection of the Ten Commandments, the Israelites' marriage covenant with God. Wine was served to mark the celebration, and people prayed the Kiddush, just as they did on Shabbat and at festivals, thanking God for their abundance. It was even common to fill cups with wine to the brim so that they might runneth over, testifying to God's overflowing blessings. The celebration itself typically lasted an entire week. It was a social event to which friends, family, and members of the community were all invited. The celebration began with the groom carrying his bride from her parents' home to his parents' home. He would be surrounded by friends who would dance as they processed through the streets. Those they passed would light lamps and join them for the rest of their journey. And once the bride and groom arrived home, the real festivities would begin. Attendees would toast the bride and groom. There would be songs and dancing, and there would be an abundance of food. And it was expected that there would be enough wine and food to satisfy all the guests throughout the week-long celebration. Failure to do so would result in great shame upon the family, which is really at the heart of the story of the wedding at Cana. Because in the end, this moment was something worth celebrating. A foretaste of a heavenly banquet, one that reflected the promise of the unification of all of God's people. Unfortunately, for Thomas and Ramah, they may never reach this moment. They live in a dangerous world surrounded by Roman soldiers and religious revolution. They're traveling with a man who claims to be the Messiah and who is disliked by Jews and Romans alike. For Ramah's father, this might just be too much to bear. A situation so unfavorable that he might not allow his daughter to get married. Her very life might be at risk. And in season 4, we're going to see how it all plays out. Well, that's it for this episode of The Chosen Explained. Now, if you haven't done it yet, be sure to click the link above and down in the description to download my free resource called 7 Biblical Secrets Hidden in The Chosen. And if you'd like to see more videos breaking down episodes of The Chosen, then just click this link right here. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.